Welcome into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. It's Tuesday, Take 5. We've been doing this each week of the NFL season, and you're watching this live stream version. You know, it's Monday night. It's a Monday night football game. That's fine. But if you're listening to it in podcast format, you're listening on Tuesday morning, and that's why we call the show Tuesday, Take 5. Dave, on this show, we run down the top 5 fantasy performances at each position and just take an early look at, what we think drove that using some of the advanced metrics from rotoviz.com. All of this flowing into the site very nicely early on Mondays now, thanks to Dave's wizardry and some of our partnerships with, the leading data sites in the industry. So, Dave, anything you want to share about the Sunday performances before we get right into the player part of the episode?
Just another really fun day of games. As always in the NFL, you're going to see some things that you did not expect. And, I think we're going to end up talking about some of the players that played in those games.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We're going to get just right into it here with the quarterback position and, some pretty big performances. I've got all of the NFL season shown, so I'm just going to make a quick adjustment. It's very easy. Switch it over to week 4. And Josh Allen leading the way, Dave. The Dolphins and the Bills faced off, and it was a totally different situation than in week 3 when the Dolphins put up 70 points. This time it was Buffalo's turn to flex their offensive and fantasy football scoring muscles. Josh Allen at the tippy top of the leaderboard, 320 passing yards, a stellar 84% completion percentage, 4 touchdowns and no picks. Talk to me about some of the advanced stats here, driving this incredible stat line for 36.5 fantasy points.
Well, I think one of the first things that we just should note here is that if you go back and you look at Josh Allen versus the Dolphins, it's just ridiculous how good this guy seems to do against the Dolphins.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
But, some other things to look at here, like his conversion rate for air yards thrown only looks like here we only saw him get into the 1.0. Only one quarterback here came close, and that was Baker Mayfield, interestingly enough. But yeah, Pacer 1.561. Very impressive.
Sort by Pacer. There you go.
Yep.
He was fourth in Pacer.
Okay, 4th in Pacer. Yards per attempt at 12.8, which you really like to see. So they were definitely able to put together a lot of yardage via passing. As a rusher, went for 4.2 yards per attempt, only took 2 sacks in the game, completed 84% of his passes, Curtis, which is pretty impressive given the fact that if you look at his ADOT, it was still 8.2, not the highest of the week, but definitely higher than some other passers you're going to look at that completed fewer passes. So Josh Allen going for 36.5 fantasy points in this contest, giving people a taste of the reason that they were going after him so early in redraft and best ball leagues.
Yeah, I mean, we had a ton of Josh Allen. I mean, you and I were kind of team draft a quarterback in round 3 this year, and I was getting a little bit scared about some of our higher stakes portfolio as a result. It just really seemed like the value, that's where the value spot was for us. We kept drawing these, front half of the fantasy draft spots, and it just felt like a real flex to end up with Mahomes or Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen when they dropped those spots. And Allen was even going, later on in the 3rd at times. So to see this type of classic blow-up performance with 5 total touchdowns, that's nice confirmation of the early season strategy behind those draft picks. And I think there's a lot more to come from Josh Allen and in terms of these types of performances. One thing you'll note here, I've got weeks 5 through 8 pulled up. This is our strength of schedule streaming app. So if we look ahead to Buffalo's next 4 games, you notice here that they do not have a bye. He's got 4 straight weeks coming up. He's got Jacksonville, New York, New England, and Tampa Bay. No one really there that's a clear avoid. Not that you're ever avoiding starting Josh Allen anyway, because he can blow up on anybody, but it's not like he's facing the Cleveland Browns defense or something like that that's just been performing at an otherworldly level. It looks like clear skies ahead for Josh Allen. Now at QB2, Dave, the rookie is back. He's back, and he looked awesome, man. He looked so awesome that Jonathan Taylor's talking about wanting to play football again. But Anthony Richardson, total opposite end of the spectrum from Josh Allen here from a completion percentage perspective. Actually only completed 44% of his passes. That's actually what, that's what we were seeing at Florida. That was the big question mark on this guy. Did he have the accuracy? Could he get it done there? He's really efficient, 200 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and of course, the rushing touchdown on the ground and 56 rushing yards. There are a couple things within the advanced analytics and what he was doing as a passer that do lend themselves to a little bit of an upside look here as he gets more comfortable in the offense, Dave. So run us through some of his advanced analytics on Richardson there.
So kind of the wild thing here, Curtis, is that he did have 311 passing yards. Now, obviously,
air yards.
Air yards. Yes. He only completed 44% of his passes. But what you're kind of seeing here, though, is a situation where if he's going to throw for that type of potential yardage, even with a lower completion rate, that could get him to the spot where when you combine that with his rushing, he's able to, maybe not have 29.6 fantasy points every week, but still play a pretty competitive role in the quarterback landscape. Now, his pacer was just 0.643, which if you sort on that, you'll see is pretty low in comparison to a lot of these other players, but also it adds 5.6 rushing yards per attempt to kind of even things out. Only took 2 sacks. 8 yards per attempt, which is actually higher than a fair amount of other players here. So yes, only a 44% completion rate, but if you're looking at Anthony Richardson through a fantasy lens, there's still some things here that kind of foretell of future, good weeks to come.
Yeah, you've got to like the aggression there. And, pending Monday Night Football results, he is the quarterback leader in rushing yards for the week with 56. So, that's the stuff that you want to see in fantasy. It doesn't always have to be pretty. Plenty of league titles were won with Justin Fields and his performances last year. This is not, far off from some of the stuff that we saw from Fields in 2022. Familiar face in the top 5 of quarterback performances in several seasons now. Lamar Jackson, QB3 on the week as of, Monday Night Football, Dave. Really efficient game for him. The Ravens just destroyed the Browns. They didn't have Deshaun Watson, and Lamar Jackson wasn't asked to do a lot, but 15 to 19 passing. Again, low passing yardage, 186 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. But you get the pair of rushing touchdowns. It's really, that's really about it. You can get into some of the passing metrics if you want here, really, Dave. But when you get 12 points on the ground just from the touchdowns, that's going to separate you from the pack.
Yeah, and you saw Lamar Jackson look like, shades of the Lamar Jackson that people were really hoping we would get this year. One of the notable things here, 120 passing air yards, actually ends up with 186 yards overall. Some of this comes from having wide receivers in position where they're able to do a lot with the ball after the catch, but that gives him one of the more notable pacers of the week. Did also have 9.8 yards per attempt, kind of coinciding with what I mentioned earlier. And a completion rate of 78.9 here for Lamar. So as you said, efficient here in terms of fantasy scoring, and then also a limited passing volume in this game, but a lot to like about how they were able to perform with that volume. Now, this game certainly did get ugly pretty early on, but nonetheless, great game from Lamar.
Yeah, and just not a fun game to watch as a Browns fan. I will note, it's nice to see, and perhaps this is, it feels improved from earlier seasons for Lamar. I can't say for sure off the top of my head on the show that it is improved from earlier seasons. It just feels that way. Yeah. If you're going to have a 6.3 ADOT, you better have a 78.9% completion rate. And so that's what, if you're not going to push the ball down the field, at least make sure that it's, it's a catchable ball for your receivers and you can get your athletes in space doing their thing. And that's what we saw, from Lamar in week 4. Going back to some of the other top 5 performers at the quarterback position, Justin Fields, man, people have just been piling on this guy all season long. If there was ever a spot that Fields was going to blow up, it was going to be against the Broncos. And thank goodness he got it done, because it was looking like a lot of sunk best ball portfolios and, people just cursing the Bears. he exploded, man. 80% completion, 335 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, did have a pick. Tell us what he did on the ground and what some of the advanced passing metrics were for Fields.
Sure. Yeah. So as you alluded to, Fields getting things done actually more so via the air in this game, Curtis, than with his legs. Only 4 rushing attempts, rushing for a total of 25 yards, comes up to 6.2 per clip. But really, a lot of this driven on the 4 passing touchdowns, had 335 total passing yards on 310 passing air yards. So we saw Fields targeting receivers downfield. We saw him converting on a number of those passes. I also think it's notable here, too, that you have that 80% completion rate given a yards per attempt of 9.6, which if you look at quarterbacks this week is one of our higher totals, actually. So very encouraging to see this performance from Fields. Hopefully it can, quell some of the fears that managers had that had invested early in Fields.
Yeah, kind of a fun stat here. Only 2 quarterbacks in week 4 had over 300 passing air yards and also actually over 300 passing yards. And that was Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts. So, that's, hey, part of being a fantasy winner is dominating in games you should dominate in. Now, I mean, Fields has left a lot on the table in the first 3 weeks of the season, but at least he got it done when everyone knew that he had to get it done. And, you can't take that away from him. So a little bit of momentum going into week 5 here for Justin Fields. If we look at his schedule ahead in the Strength of Schedule app, he draws the Commanders in week 5, the Vikings in week 6. The Vikings have been an absolute sieve too. So, I mean, that's a divisional game, but that's another good spot for him. And he's got 2 other pretty neutral to slightly positive matchups in week 7 and 8 against Las Vegas and the Los Angeles Chargers. So maybe brighter skies ahead for Justin Fields, and we'll leave the light on for just a little bit longer. Rounding out the top 5, quarterback Dave, Jalen Hurts. Plenty to say here. I mean, he looked great. 398 passing air yards. Converted that into 319 actual passing yards, pair of touchdowns through the air, just 34 rushing yards and no rushing touchdowns there. 24.2 fantasy points, just barely above the pair of quarterbacks that tied at QB6 and Joshua Dobbs and Justin Herbert. So, Jalen Hurts, a bit of a pedestrian day by Hurts standards, but does get another mention in our top 5 for the week, Dave. Why don't we head on over to the running back position now and take a look at those guys. So no surprises, man. No surprises going to occur here with Christian McCaffrey. 48.7 PPR. 48.7 PPR. Somebody tweeted out or X'd out or posted out on X, whatever it is that we're supposed to say these days, yesterday during the game that, hey, it can't be a coincidence that the week after Mike McDaniel has a pair of running backs score 4 touchdowns, the Kyle Shanahan decided to let McCaffrey score 4. And that's exactly what happened, man. This guy was absolutely dominant in every phase of the game. And, his draft position was justified. Take us through the stat line.
All right. Well, if we just pretended that this man was a receiver, just a receiver, we'd be calling out that he went 7 of 8. That's an 87.5% catch rate. He had 71 receiving yards, 56 yards after the catch, seeing just 17 air yards as a wide receiver. And then, of course, as you alluded to, if that's not enough, he also goes for 5.3 yards per attempt on 20 rushing attempts, adding 106 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. And I think just the larger thing to underscore here, Curtis, is when we were looking at players that were running backs heading into this year that could lead not only in rushing volume, but that overall opportunity. We talked about Christian McCaffrey, and we're really seeing that come to pass now. The rushing volume is there, getting 20 carries a game. You add in this tremendous receiving work, and, if he keeps this up, this could be, runaway season for a lot of teams that have McCaffrey.
Jeez. I mean, there's really not anything else to say. I mean, he's an all-time great fantasy player at this point. People have been forecasting the demise for a while. He had a couple little spells there where it was tough to stay healthy. And I mean, he's just still a revelation. I mean, you're just so happy when you go to set your lineup or you look at your best ball portfolio and you see nothing but CMC littered through there, you know it's going to be a profitable season for you. If
He's
you
a full
stay healthy. It's nuts.
He's a full 30 points ahead of the next closest player to him at this point across the season, who is Raheem Mostert with 90. McCaffrey's already at 120.
So that gap's going to widen unless somebody can really get hot and usurp where Mostert was. So I mean that's just super crazy. Legendary upside for sure. Hat tip to Pat Careen on the reference there. Okay, David Montgomery, way long ago, last Thursday night in the Island game. David Montgomery, much to the distaste of many Jahmyr Gibbs fans, including those of us here at RotoViz, David Montgomery has a very inefficient, from a rushing perspective, type of performance. 32 rushing attempts. When do you see 30 plus rushing attempts in today's NFL? This is like a rarity, man. But he does, manage 120 rushing yards on that strength of that volume, 3 rushing touchdowns. Not really a lot, as a receiver. Did catch both of his targets, Dave. He posted 34.1 PPR, just a huge game for Montgomery. What I would note here, and then I'll let you break down the RB3 for the week. -7 air yards, -3.5 average depth of target. So, I mean, Monty here was totally getting the dump offs. So, but I guess if you're going to score 3 touchdowns on the ground, getting a pair of dump offs is, that's just cherry on top.
Well, I mean, worked out for Jamal Williams, right?
Yeah,
last year in this role, and we're really seeing that. But the crazy thing, I think, and I know you said to talk about Jacobs here, but was 121 rushing yards. Now, sure, went for under 4 yards per attempt, but my word, if he's getting that type of volume that you could continue having 100-yard rushing days on top of the potential for multiple touchdowns, it's just going to be insane.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Detroit, if you look at the strength of schedule streaming app here too, they've got the 5th most attractive fantasy schedule over the next 4 weeks, with draws against Carolina, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, and Las Vegas. I mean, these have been fantasy scoring friendly defenses, and Monty's got the momentum. So let's see what happens here. Well, Dave, Josh Jacobs had a much different type of day. Also inefficient on the ground, but the Raiders, thankfully, for their own sake, I guess it didn't really matter for the outcome, but limited his attempts to just 17, 58 yards on the ground and 1 rushing TD. But the receiving was the story for Jacobs this week.
Yeah, it certainly was. So he goes 8 of 11, and that results into 81 yards for him, in a pretty fun stat here. Actually put up 82 yards after the catch, finishes with 27.9 PPR. And the thing to note here is that we're seeing Jacobs get involved in a slightly different way than we might have expected, him actually doing pretty well with that. Now, of course, there were slightly different circumstances with Jimmy Garoppolo being out, but it's always good when you can see a player on a team, kind of take a different approach to getting those fantasy points.
Well, Devontae Adams also hurt his shoulder in this game. So there's like multiple layers of things going on here, but Jacobs gives you even 2 or 3 more games at this type of fantasy output. You're starting to look at a positive win rate type player for everyone who took the chance on him, when he was going in rounds 4 and 5. You only need a couple of these big performances to kind of justify that payoff. Now, Kyren Williams, one of the unsung fantasy heroes of the season so far, LA Rams, 2nd-year player here, another 100-yard day for him on the ground, a pair of rushing touchdowns. Caught all 3 of his targets, Dave, 27.7 points. Anything stand out to you from an efficiency standpoint for Kyren this week?
Well, the first thing that I will just say, not so much about this week, this is already 6 touchdowns for him across this season, which is just very, very impressive. A target share of just 7.7, but adds 24 receiving yards. Just a nice way to kind of pad things here. Actually picks up an additional 20 yards after the catch. Leads him to scoring of 27.7 PPR. And then kind of, again, if I just zoom out here and look at Williams' high level here, I think it's worth noting that the efficiency hasn't been that great as a rusher, still at 3.8 rush yards per attempt. Oh, I lied. Actually, 5 rushing touchdowns for him. But what I was going to say was, 64 rushing attempts. I think that we're going to see him continue to just have a lot of volumes as things progress, as signaled by some of the moves the team has made. So as far as rookie running backs go, for him to already be doing these type of things at the beginning of the season, very encouraging.
I mean, the thing with Kyron too, I mean, he's not getting the receiving level of work consistently that McCaffrey's getting, but in terms of like his snap share and his usage and role within the offense, it is a CMC type role. He's consolidated everything in LA now at this point. If I look at the next 4 weeks for Kyron Williams, he's drawing a tough matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles defense in week 5, followed by a friendly matchup with the Arizona Cardinals in week 6 in a division game. And then in week 7 and 8 faces the Steelers and the Cowboys. So a little bit of a tough matchup there, but the big highlight there being the Arizona matchup in week 6. I don't think Kyron's in a situation where you really can't afford to sit him anyway. But it is just something to keep in mind. We may not see the same type of domination that we saw in the first month of the season in combination due to the defenses he's going to face and the potential return of Cooper Kupp also happening over the next month of the season. So 2 things for Williams managers to keep in mind. We're gonna round out the top 5 with a second straight week for Devon Achane. He does want to go by Achane.
Achane, okay.
Devon Achane. 8 rushing attempts, 101 rushing yards. I could just stop there because that's just freaking awesome.
The explosion, man, it is just absolutely there as advertised.
Take us through Achane's performance.
Yeah, sure. So as Curtis said, goes for over 12 yards a carry, just 8 rushing attempts for 101 yards, scores 2 touchdowns, saw 5 targets, converts 3, puts up just 19 receiving yards. Of course, that was on negative 13 air yards. So actually does log 31 yards after the catch on a negative ADOT. In terms of target share, that's actually 14.7, which on a team with some wide receivers like Miami has, that's actually fairly notable. If we could see a couple more games now where they have to continue to pass and they do so with Achane, which is looking like it's going to be, that is one of those mixtures that you really like to see. So at this point, Curtis, it's looking like he's going to be a mainstay on this leaderboard, and he's just going to absolutely eat between now and the rest of the season, or the end of the season, I should say. Yeah,
there's really no doubt about it. People are already starting to make the adjustments in Dynasty. I've been putting out some polls to try to get a feel on where some of these rookies are falling, Dave. And about 60% of my followers on X are saying they considered Devon Achane already to be a Dynasty RB1.
Yep.
Which is, he's just really moving up the polls there. And then, also interestingly, since both of these guys did finish in the top 5, I think people realize the difference in the talent level for Achane versus Kyron Williams, as well as the draft capital. A lot of smart Dynasty managers responding to these polls because it's about a 4-to-1 preference of Achane to Kyron Williams across about 1,000 responses on that poll so far. So just providing another little layer of context there. The Miami Dolphins have the New York Giants in week 5, the Carolina Panthers in week 6. Next 2 weeks are just going to be really, really fun there. Then they have a tough matchup with Philadelphia in week 7 and the always fun Miami New England rivalry, having another installment in week 8, Dave, which I know you're probably not looking forward to given the performances of these 2 squads this year.
Well, fortunately, I have a lot of Miami players on.
Yeah, you can root against yourself. You can root against yourself there. Yep. Wide receivers, Dave. We are just trucking through here.
Yep.
And they say that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, man. And it's been a couple of weeks since AJ Brown was complaining, and he's done nothing except dominate since then. 38.5 PPR. Why don't you take us through what AJB did this week, because he was dominant in every phase?
Yeah, so he saw a target share of 38.2%. That was 13 targets, converted 9 of them, puts up a total of 175 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. easily leading this week in terms of overall air yards with 212. An air yard share of 53.3, also added 52 yards after the catch and had an ADOT, Curtis, of 16.3. Only player in our leaderboard with more than that was Brandon Ayuk. Finishes with a pretty high Whopper here of 0.94. Whopper is one of those metrics you like to look to, on a go forward basis to their signal of good weeks to come as well. And, just doing AJ Brown like things in this, really showing why he is one of the best receivers in the league, and made a lot of crucial catches too for the Eagles in this really close game with Washington.
Well, one thing to note with AJB, he does have just from a team matchup perspective, he has the toughest schedule of opposing defenses over the next 4 weeks. A schedule that includes the LA Rams, the New York Jets, the Miami Dolphins, and then the Washington Commanders in week 8. However, we know it's not as simple, especially with these receivers. You can't just look at what's happening, with the context of the whole defense. If you want to understand on a week-by-week basis what AJ Brown expectations might look like given his matchup, you can follow Dave's series on the site as he breaks down all of the passing game matchups each week on rotoviz.com. So definitely want to take a look there each week to see if AJ Brown is going to explode again. Stephon Diggs, man, we talked about Josh Allen. Somebody had to prop him up here, and it was Mr. Diggs. 6 receptions, 120 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, and 36 points. This is classic Diggs. This is what everyone had in mind, taking him at the 1-2 turn and drafts all season. The first real eruption from him, it was really great to see. Anything you want to highlight from this performance?
Well, I think, it's probably notable that he scored a touchdown every other reception.
Is that good?
Yeah, probably pretty good. Racer of 1.5, which was pretty solid on the weekend. Air yard share of 39%. I think really what this performance came down to, the most notable thing is just the ridiculous touchdown rate. But, no stranger to being in our leaderboard. And here we find Diggs once again.
Well, he actually outscores AJ Brown by a half point and half PPR. So we should also note that in some formats, he was in standard and half PPR, he was the wide receiver king this week. Can't take that away from him.
So we've talked about 2 players that are no strangers to being in our top 5, but Curtis, Nico Collins, and CJ Stroud looking fantastic. So we have Nico Collins here, going 7 for 9 with a 33% target share, recording 168 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. That was on just 94 air yards. He put up 91 yards after the catch, a racer of 1.78, one of the best players in converting the air yards that he did see into yards on the week, finishes with 28.8 points.
In standard, 35.8 in PPR. Yeah, I mean, Collins.
Oh, did I actually say the wrong thing there? Wow, that's how many points he put up. 35.8.
Yeah, Dave reporting in standard. For those of you who have come to the future from the year 1999. But yeah, Nico and CJ, man, they're really cooking. Let's take a look at what Houston has ahead of it in the strength of schedule app here, because sometimes we see these surprise offenses really end up being part, of the really important thread of the fantasy football season. People were saying, hey, the Jags offense is going to take a step forward, or the Falcons offense is going to take a step forward. Not a lot of people saying that it was going to be the Texans offense taking a step forward. And I mean, now these are 2 really, with Stroud and Collins, and to a slightly lesser extent, Tank Dell. I mean, they've got some really, really interesting pieces that could continue to grow over the back half of the season. So Houston, I'm scrolling here. They looks like they're slightly above average, maybe 11th here in terms of strength of schedule over the next month of the season. They draw a matchup with Atlanta, and then they've got a New Orleans Saints date in week 6, a bye in week 7, and then Carolina in week 8. So you are going to miss out on Collins 3 weeks from now, but you got plenty of time to plan. So, if you're getting accustomed to these big performances, you do need to be looking a couple weeks ahead. You can check out some of the waiver wire content on the site if you want to get ahead of the curve there and not panic when the week actually comes. Puka is just back to his old stuff, man. You know, he had a little bit of a down week in week 3. Man, he's third in receiving yards with 163 in week 4, 9 receptions and the touchdown. I mean, he's already the new Cooper Kupp before the old Cooper Kupp even comes back. Like, I don't even know what else to say about this guy. I've just been moving him up my dynasty rankings. I've been moving him up in my rest of season rankings. And I just don't know. I mean, we've really just never seen anything like this in NFL history from a round 5 draft pick, Dave. Break down a little bit his fantasy performance. And why don't you, just for as a little bonus here, tell me, I mean, is he a top 24 dynasty receiver for you now? You can answer that. Talk to me about the performance here.
Yeah, which I will get to here. So Puka, a target share here of 26%, goes for 163 yards. And I actually think that's notable because, yes, 10 targets is a lot, but a 25.6 rate is something that's actually sustainable across the rest of the season in the offense that he is in. So we have the 163 yards. He only had 128 air yards, an air yard share of 43.1. As a result, doing a great job of turning air yards into yards. We've seen this across the year. A racer of 1.2, and a dot here, Curtis, of 12.8, one of the higher totals on the week. Finishes with 31.3 points, as you said. Now, one thing I want to zoom out on here is if you look right now across the season through the first 4 weeks, right? And you look at the wide receiver leaderboard, what you'll see is he's behind Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen, and Tyreek Hill. And the really interesting thing about it is he only has 1 receiving touchdown. Jefferson has 3, Allen has 3, and Tyreek Hill has 4. And what this is showing is the fact that this looks like the type of thing that he could keep up. Because even if you scale back those targets to some degree, which I actually don't think that would happen, or he loses some of that efficiency, maybe teams start to scheme around him a little bit more, he could offset some of that drop off with a little bit of an uptick in the touchdown rate. So no matter how you go about it, this is, just such an impressive start for the rookie. And I think you have to include him at this point in the top 24. There's so many reasons to it, just from being able to draw that opportunity to, coming through on it, to converting the air yards. And at this point, just doing, an unprecedented routine here. Through 4 games, it's almost become routine that he's going to finish, as a wide receiver 1 with a crazy game. Yeah, just to do it. I mean, so many players never have any games like what Puka's had 3 times now. Yep.
Like they won't do it in their career, like high draft picks that won't even accomplish it. So at this point, it just feels like, he's just good, and just for whatever reason, he wasn't at this level in college and didn't wow or really show his full capability throughout the prospect evaluation process. But man, going to breakfast with Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford, they must be eating like eagle eggs, like Nacho Libre, and they're finding their special powers, man. I don't know what's going on out there in LA. 4th most attractive wide receiver fantasy defense opponents over the next month. Philly, which you may not be immediately intuitive, but teams chasing Philly got a pass. And then, tough matchup with Arizona, actually, but they've had a relatively easy strength of schedule. So you got to keep that in mind. And then the Steelers and the Cowboys round out the Rams' next 4 opponents. So really the only thing that could get in the way of continued Puka dominance would be Cooper Kupp coming back at full health. But, the Rams, they're hanging, they're playing competitive ball, and they're doing it by featuring Puka in this offense. So, Kupp might be just a complimentary player, playing limited snaps and just getting a high target rate on the snaps that he plays, as they ease him into the offense. Who knows what's going to happen here. DJ Moore, Dave.
Yes.
We said that Justin Fields finally found his way. DJ Moore has been a little bit more dependable than Justin Fields, but, he has a fantastic day in this week 4 blow-up spot for the Bears. Catches 8 of 9 balls for 131 yards and a touchdown. Take us through some of the advanced stats on DJ Moore before we wrap up with tight ends.
Yeah, sure. So finishes with a target share of 28.1. One of the interesting things here, Curtis, he had 121 air yards, finishes with 131 total yards. So the takeaway for me there is that we did see Fields pushing it down the field to him. It's not like these were a couple of shorter passes that he was able to break off and run with, which I think is something that we'd like to see, a little bit of, aggressiveness in this team and in these looks going to DJ Moore. Finishes with an ADOT of 13.4, was able to convert 1.083, which, might not sound that high, but in comparison to other players that we saw finish in our leaderboard this week, such as Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin, Marquise Brown, actually a little bit higher than those guys. So we certainly like to see that. And I think that the other important thing to focus on here too is that we saw the catch rate get up to almost 90%. Now, across the season for DJ Moore, he's been around like the 75 or so mark. So nice to kind of see a little bit of, a tick up in his connection there with Justin Fields. Actually, in the 3 games prior to that, they'd been he'd had a catch rate of 73.3, going 11 of 15. So, a sizable game here, but when you consider he'd been at 11 receptions through the first 3 games, then in this matchup is able to actually get 8 receptions. So, a sizable improvement there for DJ Moore.
Chicago, a middling fantasy schedule for the next month of the season, Dave. They've got the Commanders, followed by the Vikings, the Raiders, and the Chargers. I do like at least seeing here a neutral and favorable matchup, for Fields in terms of the passing defense in weeks 5 and 6. Obviously, we know that DJ Moore is going to typically be the focal point of the Bears offense. So if they're going to have success, it's going to go through him. We're going to go over the tight end position now. And, it's a teammate. It's a Bears teammate leading the way so far in week 4. Cole Kmet, man, his first blow up of the season, 27.6 PPR. And, you can add another 3.5 points in there from a tight end premium perspective, which is, probably the main place where Kmet still would have been started at this point after the way that his season has started. So, actually even more impressive than what we're looking at from a PPR perspective. Great performance by Kmet here. This is what you want to see. 28.1 target share. Actually got a rushing attempt and 1 rushing yard too. So padding the stats with that extra 1/10 of a point in PPR formats. Talk to us about where he was targeted on the field and if this is sustainable, Dave.
Yeah. So I think, as you mentioned, with the 28% target share, I think it's notable he actually saw the same number of targets as DJ Moore. And the interesting thing here is he was not a tight end 1 on a total point basis prior to this game. This actually propels him up to number 3 on a total PPR basis. Which kind of speaks,
man.
Yeah, they really do. In terms of an air yard share, had 24.8. Actually, did see 77 air yards.
Yeah,
and was not too shabby in converting what went his way. Actually, converted 1.1 in terms of ratio here. Added 31 yards after the catch, and this is the type of performance that you really like to see from Kmet with those 2 touchdowns. He was a player that we thought could be one of these tight ends you could get, later in your draft compared to some of these guys going much earlier, and you could approximate the point totals that you're seeing from them. We're kind of starting to see that come together. There was points where it certainly looked like Fields made it, a goal to get him the ball, or he was one of the first looks when Fields was in trouble. So very encouraging performance for Cole Kmet, and hopefully we see some more.
Well, Mark Andrews had a nice breakout. I mean, he's had some great games against the Browns in his career that I've had to witness. And, Lamar didn't pass a lot, but when he did pass, he was passing to Andrews in week 4. Pair of touchdowns, catches all 5 of his targets for 80 yards. And Andrews with really the only other difference-making tight end performance, at least pending Monday Night Football results, with 25 PPR. Pretty impressive conversion of his opportunities this week.
Yeah, absolutely. So he actually takes every air yard that was thrown his way and converted it, 2x in terms of actual yardage, because he only had a total, Curtis, of 39 air yards, finishes with 80 receiving yards. Also notable too that that's on 5 receptions. So from an efficiency perspective, very high for him this week. And the air yard share of 32.5. That's always something you really like to see for these tight ends. Then on top of it, you consider, that these targets came at very high quality when they were positioned for him to get in the end zone. So, you hope that we see Baltimore continue to keep passing. We see Lamar do it with his legs and with his arm, and that the recipient of a lot of those passes is going to be Mark Andrews.
So I don't want to spend a ton of time breaking down any of the other tight end performances this week, because as you can see over here in our PPR column, I mean, the next, I don't know, dozen plus guys are all really within, 5 points of each other. But there's just a couple like key things that I would like to call out around whether we think that certain things are sustainable, or some names that we've consistently seen as the lower end or middling tight end ones from a consistency standpoint, because I think people might be able to take a little bit of encouragement in knowing that, even in a down performance, a tight end is going to be better than replacement. So the first thing is Jonnu Smith at this point, 4 weeks into the season, outperforming Kyle Pitts. I mean, you're absolutely just in shambles if you invested that high draft pick in Kyle Pitts once again, only to see him not be a feature in the offense. I mean, Jonnu Smith actually getting 6 targets. I mean, so he's one of the most heavily targeted tight ends of the week. Caught all 6 of his targets and had 95 yards. I mean, I'm not trusting Jonnu to, do this again. But I mean, this was exactly this is what we wanted to see from Pitts. So I mean, before I go into other players, anything you want to say about Jonnu?
Arthur Smith thinks he's better than Kyle Pitts, I guess. I mean, I don't know what I have to add. Maybe he is.
It's the last name thing. I mean, throw it to Smith. It's like his own create a character in Madden or something. Now, a player that we have quite a few exposures to, Dave, is Jake Ferguson. I mean, he's continued to be involved in this Cowboys offense, and so to see him go 7 of 7 receptions and targets for 77 yards. When you talk about a lucky type performance, 7s everywhere here. Actually, also scored 7.7 standard fantasy points. I mean, this is it's all coming up 7s for Jake Ferguson. 14.7 PPR. I mean, I think he's going to be involved, man. They drafted Scooney, Luke Schoonmaker, and he's not going to see the field much, man. Right now, with the way that Ferguson has kind of emerged as one of Dak's trusted targets there. So I think Ferguson could still be out there on some waiver wires, or maybe you picked him up as your TE2 after his first couple performances, and you're like, man, is he startable? I mean, I think he's startable. I mean, I think he's a guy that you would look at as a low end tight end one, kind of every week at this point with the usage in that offense.
Offenses, had a couple of huge games too, which certainly helps matters there, right? So nice to see Ferguson there. And then we were rounded out by Andrew Ogletree, who, another random Indianapolis player trying to make his way to the leaderboard. So
yeah, I mean, he scored a touchdown. If you score a touchdown as a tight end, you're gonna challenge for top 5 status. I think it's probably a little bit more encouraging for people to see Dalton Schultz make a top 6 appearance, although he needed the touchdown to get that done. Just 3 targets despite CJ Stroud's kind of ascension there. But in touchdownless performances, we do see Evan Ingram and Travis Kelce in there as expected. When you're getting 8, 9 targets in offenses like they participate in, you're going to see that. I mean, with this type of consistency from Ingram, Dave, I mean, you got to think, he really seems to be trending towards finishing the season as a top 5 tight end overall. And I mean, maybe with room to go, he's basically doing what everyone had hoped that Darren Waller was going to do. And I haven't been watching tonight's game quite yet. So, maybe Waller is going to redeem himself there a little bit, but Ingram might be the unsung tight end 4 of this fantasy season. Excited to see that play out.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing because I actually have a team where I have Ingram and Waller, and I actually made the decision this week to start Ingram and sit Waller. It's going to be really interesting to see how things play out through the rest of the year. And the other thing too is it doesn't even really feel like Jacksonville has fully clicked yet. So you could see Ingram continue to rise, and we'll have to see what happens with Waller. Hopefully things turn around, but you don't get the warm and fuzzy feeling that you're going to be able to get out of Waller what you thought heading into the year.
All right. Well, that brings the Tuesday Take 5 to its end. For those of you that are listening on RotoViz Radio, Dave and I will be back later this week with another episode of Dynasty Command Center. Man, I just feel like it's huge ranking shakeups every week. I'm doing some mock drafts with Ryan McDowell over at Dynasty League Football. We'll talk about how some of those are going. RotoViz actually giving away a sub, Dave, as part of that.
Oh, boy.
So that's kind of cool. And then we'll be back later in the week with our Start Sit show. I'll be back in the co-host seat for that this week. Appreciate. I think you had Blair fill in last week, if memory serves, Dave. So, man, we're going to talk a lot more fantasy here in week 5. Get some more W's on the board for everyone listening. Thanks for tuning in to the Tuesday Take 5.